morning, everyone. This is Professor Salduris and Professor Nicolau for the G.O.L.E. This is our second podcast. Good morning, Anna. How are you?
Good morning. I'm fine. How are you?
Very good. Thank you. Okay, so today we're going to talk about strategies for successful intercultural communication. And as we said last time, Anna, I would like you to lead the discussion about cultural and sociological aspects of the topic, as well as the verbal and nonverbal communication. And then I will talk about revelation and discovery at the end. Okay?
Okay.
All
Thank
right.
you. So I will begin with culture, which is related to, it's more sociological, but it relates also to communication, all right? To begin with, culture refers to the shared beliefs, values, customs, practices, norms, symbols, and many other things that characterize a particular group of people who live in a particular specific geographic area. They belong to the same ethnic community. And they interact. That's a small definition. There are many definitions of culture. Sometimes, in simple words, I say to my students that culture is the non-material and material products of human societies. Okay, because what I mentioned earlier, beliefs, values, customs are non-material in essence. But buildings, art, and many other manifestations of culture, they are part of the so-called material culture. Okay, like for example, the subway in New York is a product of the material culture. Okay. So there are certain cultural elements, as we said, the beliefs and values. They refer to refer to the convictions or accepted truths held by a cultural group, while values represent what is considered good, important, desirable. These beliefs and values guide behavior and decision making, our behavior and decision making. Norms are related also to values. It's an expression actually of values. Norms could be written rules, like for example, laws, the laws that we have, or unwritten rules and expectations that govern the behavior of individuals in a particular culture. So they dictate what is considered appropriate or inappropriate conduct in various situations. Okay. Another element of culture is symbols and rituals. Cultures often have symbols, like for example, flags, religious icons, and so on, and rituals, ceremonies, public holidays. All these hold special significance because they help reinforce cultural identity within groups in a particular society. And there comes one also very important cultural element, which is language. Language is a crucial aspect of our culture, okay? It shapes how we communicate, how we express our ideas, and how we convey meaning. Different languages can reflect unique worldviews and cultural nuances. Another element is cultural diversity. There is cultural, what we call in sociology, cultural variation and multiculturalism. Well, cultural variation refers to cultures vary widely across regions, nations, and communities. This diversity can be seen, of course, in language, cuisine, clothing, religious practices, and many other things. Multiculturalism refers to societies where people from various cultural backgrounds coexist, often leading to a rich tapestry of traditions and perspectives. Culture is typically passed down from one generation to the next through socialization. Family, education, the media, religion, all these are institutions that play a vital role in transmitting cultural values and practices and customs and rituals to the young members of a society. Another element of culture is identity, cultural identity. Cultural identity refers to an individual's sense of belonging to a particular cultural group. It can be a significant aspect of a person's self-concept and can influence also their values, beliefs, as well as their behaviors. Another element is what we call cultural relativism, which is the idea that cultural practices and beliefs should be understood within our cultural context rather than judged by the standards of another culture. It emphasizes actually the importance of respecting cultural diversity and avoiding what we call ethnocentrism. Ethnocentrism is basically the womb of racism and xenophobia. So it is very, very important not to judge other cultures by the standards of our own culture. And this happens quite often when we travel abroad, when we go to new places. We always make comparisons with our own culture. Sometimes we find things that are very, very interesting and unique and we like, and other times we just simply criticize the other culture based on the standards of our own culture. Another characteristic basically is what we call, another element, is cultural communication. Understanding cultural differences in communication styles, non-verbal cues, for example, that we're going to talk about later, and norms is essential for effective intercultural communication. Misunderstandings can arise when individuals from different cultures interact. So really, when we come in contact with people from other cultures, it's good to be to approach communication with an open mind. Okay. And two more things I'm going to mention before I finish with culture is culture and society. Culture is closely intertwined with society. It influences social structures, institutions, and systems. Cultural values often shape laws, as we said earlier, governance, and social norms within a society. Actually, you cannot have society without culture, and you cannot have culture without society. As you cannot have a dance without dancers, and you cannot have a dancer without a dance. And finally, global culture. In today's interconnected world, there is a growing concept of a global or globalized culture, which includes shared elements such as international pop culture, global brands, of course, and definitely the internet. Understanding and respecting cultural diversity is essential for promoting tolerance, fostering cross-cultural relationships, and addressing global challenges. At the same time, cultural awareness and sensitivity are vital skills in a multicultural world, whether in the context of business, diplomacy, education, or everyday interactions. So that's it for culture, Chris.
I love it. I love that you touched upon everything, including media and xenophobia and the the value of sociology in the space of communication, because those two are so inseparable that really that's what the heart of communication is in our culture, because each culture expresses themselves differently, not just through their discussions, but also their music, their media, all of it, the art, everything, every aspect of an individual's cultural identity impacts the way that they are able to communicate, and also possibly hinders the things that they are limited in terms of their understanding, which we'll talk about later. But for now, I'd love to hear more about specifically verbal communication. What is it and why it's important to communicate with others, which I know
Mm-hmm.
prepared.
Mm-hmm. Yes, thank you, Chris. Verbal communication actually is a form of communication that involves the use of spoken words and language to convey messages, ideas, thoughts, and information between individuals or even groups. It is one of the primary and most common modes of human communication. Verbal communication can take place in various settings, including face-to-face conversations, in phone calls, video chats, podcasts, public speaking, lectures, meetings, and many more. Key aspects of verbal communication, of course, include language. Verbal communication relies on the use of a shared language or dialect understood by both the sender and receiver. Language can be spoken, signed in the case of sign language, because there are people who use the sign language, or a combination of both. Another aspect of verbal communication is our tone and pitch. The tone of voice and pitch can greatly influence the messages, the meaning of the message. For example, a sentence said with enthusiasm may convey a different message than the same sentence said with sarcasm or anger. Volume, another characteristic. The loudness or softness of speech can also impact communication. Whispering, shouting, or speaking at a normal volume can all convey different emotions or intentions. Another aspect is pace. The speed at which someone speaks can affect how well others understand the message. Speaking too quickly may make it difficult for others to follow, while speaking too slowly might be perceived as tedious. Another aspect, clarity. Clear and articulate speech is essential for effective communication. Pronunciation, enunciation, and the use of appropriate vocabulary are important factors in ensuring that the message is easily understood. Listening, I consider this very, very, very important. Effective verbal communication is a two-way process. It involves not only speaking, but we also become active listeners. The receiver of the message must pay careful attention to the speaker and provide feedback or responses as needed, because sometimes we tend not to listen to the other person. Another aspect is refers to non-verbal cues. Verbal communication is often complemented by non-verbal cues such as facial expressions, body language, gestures, eye contact, etc. These non-verbal elements can convey also additional information or emotions. There are other two more aspects. The context in which the communication takes place can greatly impact the interpretation of the message. Verbal communication may have different connotations or meanings in different situations. And finally, feedback. Verbal communication typically involves a feedback loop where the receiver responds to the sender's message. This feedback helps ensure that the message was understood as it was intended. Putting this whole thing together, effective verbal communication is a critical skill in personal, professional, and social interactions. It allows people to share information, express feelings, resolve conflicts, negotiate, and of course, build relationships. Build, maintain, and end relationships. Misunderstandings and miscommunications can arise if verbal communication is not clear or if non-verbal cues are inconsistent with the spoken words. Therefore, developing good verbal communication skills is essential for effective and successful communication.
Thank you, Anna. I love that you talk about active listening because that's actually a major point that keeps coming up in our conversations. And it's very important because not just socially, but philosophically, if we don't hear what the other person's saying rather than simply pushing our own agendas, we don't make progress. So that's very important. But I love that you outlined tone, pitch, volume, pace, clarity, and etc. Carefully in this part of our conversation. The next is basically, why is it so important to communicate with others? Why do you think it's the critical thing?
Why it is important? For a number of reasons. Because we're human beings, and because we need to communicate with others to satisfy intentional needs, relational needs. Okay, we can get things done by communication. Okay, we all work, for example, in a common project. Our everyday life requires communication to get things done. And also the relational needs, which is very, very important, establishing relationships with others, whether we're talking about romantic relationships, whether we're talking about friendships, professional relationships, familiar relationships. So this is why communication is very, very important, because we are human beings, and in order to survive, we need to be able to cooperate and communicate with other human beings.
I agree. Is there additional information you'd like to add to the verbal communication component, or would you like to proceed to nonverbal?
No, I just want to say to the last thing I just mentioned that this is Aristotelian.
Yes.
In the sense that Aristotle draws from Plato's dialogue. Was it with Protagoras? A discussion, a dialogue between Protagoras, a sophist. Was he a sophist? I think he was a sophist, and Socrates. And they discuss, among other things, the theme of pleasure. Anyway, Aristotle says the man is in the Aristotelian, the old philosophical scripts. The man is a social and political animal.
Yes. So in our class, in the philosophy class, we do talk about 5 aspects of humanity, what a human being consists of, basically. The first one is spiritual, then the next one is psychological, and then the next intellectual. But then there is the social and the physical. And so the social is tied unequivocally to communication and to the way that we absorb and process information, that we accept or reject communication, not just from other people, but the reality of what the world is trying to offer us as a whole. So in larger groups, perhaps organizations have their missions and stuff, and they're trying to communicate through those missions really what they want from us or what their expectations are. Okay, thank you so much. So then the next we'll proceed to nonverbal communication, Anna.
Okay, nonverbal communication, we mentioned a few things previously. Nonverbal communication is the transmission of information, thoughts, feelings, and intentions without the use of words. So it involves a wide range of cues and signals, including facial expressions, body language, gestures, eye contact, posture, tone of voice, and even proxemics. This means the use of personal space. Nonverbal communication is a fundamental aspect of human interaction and can complement or even override verbal communication in conveying messages and understanding others. So some key aspects of non-verbal communication, we mentioned already facial expressions. Facial expressions are one of the most potent forms of non-verbal communication. Different facial communications convey emotions such as happiness, sadness, fear, surprise, disgust, anger, etc. Micro expressions also are very brief and involuntary facial expressions, and these can reveal hidden emotions. Okay, these are quite unconscious in a way. So they can betray a feeling and emotion sometimes. Body language refers to the way individuals use their bodies to communicate a wealth of information. This, as I said earlier, includes posture, gestures, movements. For example, standing tall and maintaining open body language can signal confidence, while slouching and closed-off gestures may indicate insecurity or defensiveness. Gestures are deliberate movements of the hands, arms, or body that convey meaning. Common gestures vary across, of course, the different cultures, and can have different interpretations. For example, a thumbs up gesture may mean approval in some cultures, but it may be considered offensive in others. Another aspect of nonverbal communication is obviously eye contact. The level and quality of eye contact during a conversation can communicate interest, attentiveness, or even intimidation. So appropriate use of eye contact can help establish trust and rapport. Tone of voice, the way words are spoken, we mentioned earlier, the pitch, the volume, rhythm, intonation, all these can convey emotions and attitudes. So, for example, a sarcastic tone can completely change the meaning of a statement, okay? Proxemics, of course, refers to the use of personal space in communication. So different cultures have varying norms about how close individuals should stand or sit when interacting. And violating these norms can lead to discomfort or misinterpretation. So, for example, in Greece, we are very much used to have a very stand very close to one another, and especially people we know, we can touch them very often. When we talk to them, when we speak to them. I know that, and correct me if I'm wrong, that in America, people want to maintain their personal space. I don't know if it is true. You can tell me about it.
It depends on, because America is kind of, we have so many different cultures here in America. So a lot of times my Greek friends, we're very close to each other, the cafenio kind of situation where we're stuck together. Also, a lot of other cultures, the Eastern European cultures, have the same proximity in their space. So the personal space is still existing, but it's smaller, right? Whereas other cultures who come from different backgrounds but are here, they want more personal space, or they get confused if you reach out and, you know, touch them. I'm glad that you bring the personal space up, because with COVID, I remember all of the Greek students and faculty and professionals were all of a sudden stressed because we couldn't do the big hug, the big handshake, the big movement towards each other, which is the first sign of, you know, compatriotism, right? That we're on the same level. I trust you. We're together on this. The unity that comes from just existing in the same space disappeared overnight. And it was so interesting. Even the most polite people, they just suddenly put their hand up, which, if you know the na gesture, you know, it's this one. So I thought it was so strange. And I saw it from the very beginning before the quarantine happened. Everybody was just distancing themselves. And it was a forced thing, and you could tell. And the regret on the person's face, on the other person's face, was so clear. The other thing, in terms of not just this personal space, but also the eye contact, when we moved everything to virtual, there were people reading off of scripts, because you have to, at meetings, read off of sometimes a script or something. And so the contact with the camera was starting to lag. And so eye contact wasn't there. People looked like they were looking somewhere else and they were unfocused. But it wasn't the case. It's just, we were all trying to navigate at the same time, the same thing. So it's interesting that you brought these two up. And tone is the one I would love to hear a little more about, because it hits the verbal communication part, but it's also nonverbal, because you mentioned it in both.
Yes.
Considered it in both. I'd love to hear more about it.
Yes. Before that, I just want to say, because you mentioned the COVID-19 and the haptics, the touch, as we call it haptics in communication studies. It's the touch, because I understand what you mean, because the physical touch can convey a wide range of emotions and intentions. Okay, it's the friendly pat on the back, a handshake, a hug. Okay, all these express the warmth and connection you mentioned. Okay, earlier. So this is missing. I mean, once you just simply say hello without the handshake, the hug, it changes everything, because the warmth and connection communicated by the haptics, it's gone. That's what happened in a way, and it really emotionally, psychologically affected us all. That we were not allowed to touch the other person, our best friend, family member. I completely understand what you meant. Uh,
Yes.
so you wanted to say yes. So you wanted me to tell you about the tone of voice. As I said, the tone of voice uh, actually refers to the emotional quality, attitude, style conveyed through the spoken language. Sorry. Um, so we said it is the pitch, the highness or lowness, highness or lowness of a person's voice. Okay, a high pitch is often associated with excitement, enthusiasm, urgency sometimes, while a lower pitch can convey seriousness, authority, or even calmness. The volume relates to the loudness or softness of the voice. Okay, raising one's voice can indicate anger, frustration, uh, or even emphasis, while speaking softly can suggest intimacy, secrecy, a desire not to disturb others. Like, for example, when we enter the library. Okay, we have a very low, a soft volume. Yes, the volume is very low of our voice, because we don't want to disturb others. The rhythm and the pace, the rhythm and the pace of speech determine the speed and the flow of communication. Okay, as I said earlier, speaking rapidly may indicate excitement, but also nervousness or even urgency. A slower pace can signify thoughtfulness, deliberation, or even sadness. I mean, there are more things. I mean, this by no means this is not exhaustive of the examples that I mentioned. Intonation refers to the rising and falling patterns of pitch within a sentence or phrase. For example, a rising intonation at the end of a sentence can turn a statement into a question. When you, for example, this may have happened to you as an instructor. Okay, so you begin with a statement, and then by just rising the intonation at the end, you turn suddenly the statement into a question. Okay, so these changes in intonation can convey questions, statements, exclamations, or even uncertainty. Uh, what else? The overall quality or character of the voice, such as warmth, harshness, friendliness, or sarcasm, can significantly impact how a message is received. Consistency is another characteristic. Consistency in tone of voice is important for clear communication. Sudden shifts in tone can confuse or mislead the listener. And also, cultural and contextual factors are also important. The interpretation of tone of voice can vary across cultures and contexts. Um, for example, what may be considered an appropriate tone in one culture may be perceived differently in another. And to give you an example, the Greeks talk very loud compared, for example, to people coming from other cultures. Okay, and to understand that, you need to travel to other countries. For example, when you are in the United Kingdom, you can notice that the only people with a loud voice in the streets, on the train, in whatever context, are the Greeks. Okay, we talk very loud. We tend to talk very loud. Whereas the British do not talk that loud. Okay, and they have mentioned that. I have British friends who mentioned that you speak very loud.
I'll tell you,
Okay,
it's not just the Greek, also Italian and uh,
Italian.
Mediterranean, because we include also the Egyptian and other North African countries, because they do the same thing. They do very similar, you know.
And the Albanians. And the Albanians.
And the Albanians, yes, they're our cousins, of course. So
Mm-hmm.
it's very interesting because I have a good example for it. One time I was in an office and the director is Italian and I'm Greek. And so together we're talking, we're very excited. Her son is getting married. And so she's telling me all about it and I'm very excited. Outside the door, not even a few feet away, right, is the security guard who hears the loud voice. She doesn't know what we're talking about. She hears the loud voice. She runs to the office. Is everyone okay? And we both look at her because she looks so stressed and we're both so happy. And we said, yes, are you okay? Because she wasn't used to that high volume. She was used to the much lower, you know, calmer.
Yes.
Yes, I love that.
Yeah. Yeah, but that's true. I mean, we have all observed that. Also, or anyone who has gone abroad, I'm talking about the Greeks,
Mm.
or even people from America, if they have ever come to Greece, they probably have noticed that we tend to speak very loudly, and not only us, as you mentioned, not only the Greeks, but Mediterranean people in general.
It's
So
true.
yes, yes. So so I would like to say that the different tones, if we can look at some examples, a warm and welcoming tone conveys friendliness, okay, positive intentions. An authoritative tone conveys confidence, expertise, and a sense of leadership or control. A compassionate tone conveys empathy, understanding, a caring attitude. A formal tone is characterized by polite and respectful language, and it's often used in professional or official settings. A casual tone is relaxed and informal, suitable for conversations, usually among friends, colleagues, or in whatever relaxed social settings we may find ourselves in. And also the sarcastic tone, which I personally don't like, which is marked by irony, mockery, insincerity. Okay, and this is intended to convey the opposite of what is actually said. Okay, and I find it very rude in a way. Okay, being ironic. I don't know. This is something I really don't like.
I would like to just ask, how do you see, because you've observed how COVID has impacted communication clearly, how do you feel that we've compensated for the shift in the nonverbal? Because verbal communication, I think, hasn't had to change. We weren't forced to change too much about verbal communication, but our nonverbal communication has had to shift so much. And you already started talking about it with the body language and the spatial distance.
The what I would say, okay, we're still pretty much puzzled when we see people, if we should hug them or not. Okay, there's some uncertainty there, especially if you haven't seen people for a very long period of time. Uh, um, I mean, is this what you want me to talk about? To talk
Yes,
about?
basically, because it's changed and it's, you can see the confusion and a little bit of I want to say sadness. It's almost a sadness that people start coming and then there's like a little hesitation between shaking hands or
Yes, I guess.
bump or
Yes, yes,
things. Yes.
yes,
Someone
yes,
comes
yes.
to me
There
with
is
yes.
yes, the hesitation exists
Mm.
during the pandemic, and also when it after the lockdowns. the people were there was this too much uncertainty regarding how am I going to um, approach a person, if I'm going to hug the person, if I'm going to kiss the person, the normal things we used to do in the past. Now you have to think. In the past, you didn't have to think. You just hug the other person. Today, you need to think. Okay, if they want to, try to guess. Actually, do they want me to hug them or not? I don't know how comfortable the other people feel today. The other thing you can notice is how people look at others if there when there is the pandemic is over officially by the World Health Organization. So people, there are still people. This is when we discuss language as a practice. Okay, how language can actually make us do things uh, in our lives. So if you think about how many people are still wearing masks, and I'm not talking about the vulnerable groups, but people who are still very much afraid, and how others look at them, and how they look at the other people who don't wear masks.
So then the last component is going to be the philosophical component about revelation and discovery. And most of what you discussed already, Anna, is about really revealing what we want to say, revealing something,
Yes.
but also the active listening, going back to the active listening, revelation is also two ways. It goes two ways because you're not just revealing yourself to other people, you're discovering other people and their reality as well, which is the only way to proceed when we're trying to understand humanity, or when we're trying to find our place in a community, or when we're trying to understand how to do something. So for example, the best example I can give is from Plato's Meno, where the young man comes in and Plato is trying to demonstrate really that math is in his head. The potential to do the mathematic is in his head. The potential to calculate is in his head. And he's trying not to just give the answer to the young man. He's trying to have the young man discover for himself. And so a lot of times, and we see this with students and teachers, but it's also with parents and their children. It's also sometimes with mentors and their mentees, or supervisors and their employees. We see it again and again, this Socratic method. So the Socratic method really pervades a lot of relationships, and the communication strategy is very harsh because Socrates himself was a harsh kind of guy, very direct and very set on the idea that you are going to reveal this to yourself. You're going to figure it out for yourself. I will provide the questions, but you will discover, because that's the only way you're going to develop your processing ability. And the method is not for everyone. And in my class, we talk about the fact that there are different strategies for different people. And it's the same in communication. There are different strategies that work when you're communicating something, because the same mode of communication doesn't work for every single person. The way I would tell a story to my yaya is not the same I would tell it to my supervisor, even though Yaya runs the house, just like my supervisor runs the office, but it's a different community. You're dealing with a different community. Also, Yaya is Greek, so I could talk a little louder and she won't get upset, right? But if I talk to my boss the same volume, the boss will get upset. So it's important to really keep the idea of who you're speaking to in mind. And that takes us again back to Aristotle, which we already discussed last week about the ethos, logos, pathos. So we won't repeat this one. What I'm going to add is that respectful communication is what opens the door to productive and intercultural communication. Communication, as you said many times, Anna, is considered productive when it leads to a positive action. And then what I'll add to it is the revelation or clarification of something that was previously either unknown or misunderstood. So culturally, the only way for us to become a real sustainable global society is to be able to stay open-minded to the truth, which is we don't know everything. So Socrates will tell you, you don't know everything. The one thing I know is that I don't know everything. I know myself, and that's the best that I can know. The rest I have to discover from other people or from the world around me. I have to accept that that is my limitation and that my knowledge is imperfect. So once we absorb that piece of information, that reality, we're able to communicate more clearly. But also in philosophy, there are so many strategies for communication that Aristotle is helpful because he really lines it up very strategically and helps us assess the various factors that impact the value of our message. The factors that impact us most are in fact cultural or sociological, which is why today's talk is so critical to the understanding and value of what Aristotle is teaching us in his works, Rhetoric and Nicomachean Ethics. So to wrap up, because I don't want to talk too much, proper processing and application of the information that we shared today can really lead to transformative interactions between the members of a global society. Because being able to hear one another and to respond to the needs of another person properly or another community properly, and being able to test out and recognize the types of communication that work or fail, like, I mean, feeling safe in doing that and not just trying to push our agendas forward and forcing it to be accepted by other people. This is critical to the future of sustainable humanitarian conduct, which is really a bigger ethical concept we can talk about another time. The takeaway for
Absolutely.
yes, I feel the takeaway for today is that speaker intention, as well as active listening, verbal clarity, and nonverbal expressions are all critical to the advancement of sharing philosophical thoughts and sociological traditions with one another. Anna, what do you think?
Absolutely. Absolutely. You're right. This is all these are interconnected. And I want to say that effective communication can help us convey our message clearly, to avoid misunderstandings, build trust, and achieve the communication goal. Many things, active listening is important. Pay full attention to the speaker, show interest, not only through non-verbal cues like nodding, maintaining eye contact, and things like that. Avoid interrupting. Reflect on what was said and ask clarifying questions if needed. Clear and concise language, empathy. These are very, very important for communicating effectively. Philosophy as well, but
It's a combination. Philosophy and sociology work hand in hand. You can't separate one from another. And also the
yes,
vehicle towards both the study of sociological concepts and philosophical concepts is clear communication, interactive communication, and increasingly an openness to active listening, which is why we have today's podcast.
yes,
I think this is a good spot to stop,
absolutely.
and then we continue next week. Yes.
Yes,
All right.
yes, yes.
Okay. All right. So thank you so much, Anna, for taking the time today, and we'll continue next week. Yes.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Chris. See you next week.